Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry. We have a lot of marrow to suck out of these political bones today. Also, Dr. Ed Moore will be on with us.
He is the president of the Independent Colleges and Universities of Florida. There are 31 of them, covering some 160,000 students around the state. He always has interesting observations on what is going on in the educational field and all around Florida and the nation as far as our universities are concerned. So we'll invite you to pull up a chair, put an ear on the radio or the TV, the Tough TV. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks in the Orlando area, also of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political analyst Al Spry. Yes, we are also on Tough TV, in addition to 80-plus stations across Florida, so welcome to you. You can watch us on Tough TV 38 in Orlando. You can receive Tough TV 38 over the air with an antenna in select apartment complexes and mobile home parks in Central Florida. Tough TV 38 is also carried on Channel 69 on the Summit Broadband Cable TV system. If you can't receive Tough TV, well, get mad about it and then call your cable system.
I'm not going to take it anymore.
Or satellite provider to carry Tough TV today.
There you go. All right. Well, lots and lots of things to talk about. And,
I'm itching, right, Reagan?
Yeah, I do.
I'm itching because we had Representative Dan Webster on last week. And as you know, I asked Dan, is this a good idea? You guys voting for this bill and including this option to shut down the government, which is what it turned into. And, he obviously said the political thing, which is we're doing the will of the people and they don't want Obamacare and so forth, which is debatable depending on what poll you look at. So what happens? I said, are you sure? The Republicans have an opportunity to really have mud on their face here, whether it leads to short-term overturn next year of votes, maybe not. That's debatable as well. But is it a good idea? And he said, no, I don't think there'll be a shutdown. Well, what do you know? We have achieved a shutdown, Reagan.
Yeah, we have. The Republican problem is that they have not figured out a way to convince the people that the Democrats need to share some blame in this. The final bill that they put out there before the shutdown was to delay the individual obligations to begin this Obamacare program for a year, the same year that the president gave to big business. He delayed their participation in it, but they refuse, they stonewall when it comes to you and me.
I think...
And they have been just as stubborn as the Republicans.
Oh, very true.
The Republicans gave up on these, let's strip out the whole thing, and said, let's give people a year delay.
But here's what the Republicans miss. They miss the human psychology aspect.
Well, that's what
people
I'm saying.
Want to blame,
have not figured out.
They want to blame a side.
They have not figured out how to share the blame.
People do not want to blame both sides. It's like football. You don't root for both teams.
You don't get the president. You do.
You basically pick a side, and you put all your might into that side. And then, I agree with you, Reagan. Here's the thing. Republicans need to get off this Obamacare thing because they can't just be the party that's trying to stop Obamacare. They have to come up with maybe some legislative ideas. And other than Obamacare,
how about
can we let it rest with the Obamacare already?
How about all the other issues in the world? Yes.
Exactly. And they don't. There's such an obsessive compulsive aspect to this Congress. You can take a psychology course on this Congress. We have OCD people in Congress now. They can't get off that track, and it's going to be to their detriment. But not only to their detriment, Reagan, the detriment of the country. We look already like laughingstocks, not only to ourselves, but to the rest of the civilized world. And it's all because these gentlemen and ladies of the Congress, I'm going to be nice, cannot get past their own short-term egoic thinking and get the job done. They can't get off the Obamacare train. Enough with it already. You know what? You lost the battle, but you're throwing in the towel on the entire war by not taking it to a different place. Here's what Alan West says. He says that if this was put out right before the shutdown, he said that if the government shuts down, we should vote out everybody. The quote is, shutting down the government is the most unpatriotic thing Congress could do. I agree, Mr. West. Yeah. West also wrote supporters that we elected the 535 men and women who serve in the House and Senate to do a job. And that job does not include such extreme partisan bickering that they become incapable of rectifying their differences to keep the government running. Amen.
All right. On that note, we need to take a pause along the network line. Let us remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And, of course, I'm the always indecisive and shy and introverted Al Spry.
We'll be joined by Dr. Ed Moore of the Independent Colleges and Universities of Florida when the conversation continues. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and also seen on Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al, at this point of the program, we are joined by Dr. Ed Moore. He is the president of the Independent Colleges and Universities of Florida. He's been here several times before, and Ed, it's always a pleasure to have you with us in the studio.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, to refresh folks who may not remember, but it's been close to a year, I think, since you were here.
About that. Yeah.
Give us a half a minute of your own background and explain to us what the ICUF is.
Yeah, I'm the president of an association of 31 private colleges and universities here in Florida, the independent colleges and universities. They're all the private, not-for-profit schools around Florida. We serve close to 160,000 students, about 135 sites around Florida. Just you name it, we offer it. We offer really about a quarter of the baccalaureate degrees that are granted in Florida, about 30+% of the PhDs, over 40% of the master's degrees, and over 50% of the first professional degrees. So it's a pretty wide range of academic endeavors.
Yeah. Why is such an association necessary?
It's for branding is part of it. Part of it is bringing people together to get cost savings opportunities, and part of it is to have representation before the state government and federal government.
So there's a lobbying angle as well.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. We're very focused on student financial aid and deregulation or too much regulation or the need for regulation, particularly in Washington. This year I'm honored to be the national chairman of our national organization, which represents about 1,000 private colleges and universities all over the country.
So there is a blanket sort of regulatory group of rules that the feds put out.
Oh, yes.
Even though we're talking about, in your case, Florida schools.
Yeah, the federal government, although we'll see today, since it's the government's shutting down this week, and we'll see how that plays out as far as higher ed. But the government is always interested in meddling. I would say they want to regulate, they want to cost control, they want to make sure what's going on out there, and they do such a fine job of that I can see why they'd want to do more. But tongue firmly in cheek there.
Yes.
Well, here's my question. Education has gotten really, really expensive. And why do you think are the top couple of reasons that is? Way above the rate of inflation. We have students that are accumulating massive amounts of debt, and I wanted to ask the man in the know, what is causing all of this?
The cost of living. It's interesting, when President Obama made a big deal about this about a month or so ago, I went back and did some quick research, and he made the public statement that over the last 30 years, the cost of higher education has gone up 250% over those 30 years, and how horrible that is. And if you look quickly at the federal budget, federal budget's gone up 300% over that same time frame, and just about the cost of anything. The cost of an automobile in the 30-year time frame was average cost of an automobile was about $7,000 then that's $28,000 now. That's over a 400% increase. Yeah. The cost of gasoline, the cost of goods and services, the cost of salaries. I mean, inflation is something that Washington really should be addressing, and how it's eaten away at our ability to do just about anything. And we suffer from that as well in higher education. If you expect us to offer the same quality level or an increased quality level of education, it takes money to do that. And increasingly, the money that we have to use isn't worth as much as it was last week or 10 years ago.
Well, my understanding was that it kind of, and maybe I'm incorrect in this, but the more you guarantee loans, obviously the government guarantees student loans. I see the student loan bubble, I'm going to refer to it as in a similar frame as the housing bubble of 6 or 7 years ago. Here's why. When the government says, oh, yeah, charge whatever you'd like, we'll back it, it allows some types of abuse. I'm not saying every school and every organization. I understand your point about cost of living and inflationary pressures and so forth. But don't you think it gives a free hand to colleges when the government says, well, we'll back whatever you guys want to charge with guaranteed student loans, and then they shove it all on the students? I mean, you have students graduating with liberal arts degrees who have no chance of getting meaningful employment in order to cover $1,000, $1,500 worth of student loan debt, which is quite a bit when your rent is, to take rent and other considerations. You're in your early 20s. I was there, but I didn't have the amount of student debt that students are accumulating now. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I don't fully agree with it, actually. The interesting thing, if we didn't have the horrible recession that we've had, and we had normal employment and people going to work, and students coming out and having jobs available to them, this wouldn't be that much of an issue. It just all sort of came together at the same time. The reality of student loans is that of students that graduate in the private college sector, the average student loan indebtedness is about $28,000, and those going to public institutions, the average indebtedness is just under $20,000. I find that number quite interesting because you're talking about a roughly $8,000 difference between somebody going to what people perceive as a high tuition private sector or low subsidized tuition public sector, and the difference is only about $2,000 a year. What it shows is that the students are borrowing money not just to pay tuition, the students are borrowing money to live. And if it takes you longer to graduate, that's why it's critical to try to graduate in 4 years. But students that are on the 5-year or 6-year plan, that's money, the cost of car insurance, food, rent, all these other things that eat up that amount. Now, when it comes to the federal government loaning money, I think that's largely their own fault. Under President Obama, the federal government pushed a lot of private lenders out of it, became sort of the company store, if you will, for student loans. And that in itself, when you are the primary lender, there's still a little bit of private engagement in it, but not so much anymore. If you're the primary lender now and you weren't before, obviously your loan portfolio is going to grow. And it got much bigger. Another factor that influenced that was years ago, not too many years ago, within the last 10 years, particularly in Florida, a lot of folks would borrow against their homes. They would take home equity loans in order to help. They planned on that. When Johnny and Susie go to college, I'll borrow a little extra money against my house, and we'll pay that off over time. When most of Florida went underwater, there was no home equity, and people couldn't borrow from there, so they went to what was now the primary source, what I call the company store. They went to the federal government, borrowed money. There's a lot of factors involved here, but it's still, at the end of the day, it is still the best investment that someone could make. You're more likely to be employed in rough times. The unemployment rate with people with college degrees was far less than people without those degrees. It's something you buy, if you want to talk about it as a commodity, you're buying that diploma and you're going to have it forever. So if the average loan indebtedness is, say, between public and private is $25,000, the average cost of a new car today is $27,500. It costs you more to buy a new car than it did in what your indebtedness is, and you're going to pay that off over time. Which would you rather pay off over time? A car that when you drive it off the lot, it's not worth as much as it was that you just paid for it and is going to depreciate rather quickly, or that diploma that's going to continue to maintain value the rest of your life. I say that's the best deal, and we ought to be encouraging that and continue to encourage it and find better ways to keep costs down, work to make so students don't have to borrow so much money, but encouraging people to go to school, stay in school, and get that diploma.
Well, and that's a good point. I think that students have to understand that these are loans that are payable upon graduation. And there are students out there who take out a lot more than $28,000.
Sure.
There are students out there with $100,000 plus for a 4-year degree. To me, that's a great amount of debt to be taking on when you're just starting your career.
Yeah, I agree.
Here's a question for you. What do you think? You're going to invest this money. You're a prospective student. For people who are listening and watching, what are the degrees that are the most marketable in this new crazy economy that we're in, that you're seeing?
I think what students ought to learn is that learning is going to be a lifelong endeavor from now on. The economy changes so quickly. I think the jobs of the future are probably things we don't even know now. If you think now about the cloud and internet-based jobs and all these other things that weren't even there 10 years ago. Now we take for granted, iPhones and iPads and all these other tools that we use. They were not there. And now I think what you have to learn is, to me, which makes even more critical the liberal arts, and we tend to focus on STEM and engineering and math and all these other degrees, critically important. But I think what really needs to be focused on is students going to college come in largely underprepared, and the most recent ACT scores and SAT scores have verified that students come in not as prepared for college as they should be. They should leave college prepared to enter the workforce to be lifelong learners with an ability to think, reason, write, speak, the skills that are critical for you to transfer from job to job. All the studies are showing that people nowadays, the millennials and whatever we want to call each new generation, probably will have 4, 5, 6 different careers or different places that they're going to work during their life. You need people that can think and adapt and innovate. That takes time to develop those kinds of skills. We wish we had a better prepared group coming into college every year. Well, the state of Florida has done a tremendously good job over the last, I'd say, 14 or 15 years of improving what's coming out of our K-12 system, and we've got more work to do there. So what I'd like to see is Florida refocusing again on that. I think under Jeb Bush, we were calling it back then the K-20 concept, but I think now it ought to be more of a VPK, the pre-kindergarten through life, and looking at higher education as a lifelong endeavor. It's not a stop sign when you get that baccalaureate degree anymore. You're going to go back for retraining. You're going to go back for professional development, maybe advanced degrees. People are going to be learning their whole lives now.
So when we come along with this notion that a university is only going to take the top 10% of a graduating class from any high school in the state or whatever, if the ACTs and SATs aren't all that good, what have we gained?
It was Texas that did that 10% guarantee. Florida's a rich and robust state in higher education. We're lucky, and I think people don't really understand that. We've got a tremendous, now it's called the Florida College System. A lot of the listeners might remember it as junior colleges or community colleges, 28 of them all across Florida. We've got 12 now with the new one developing, Florida Polytechnic, 12 state universities, 31 ICUF schools. There's a for-profit sector out there where people that might want to avail themselves. So there's a lot of opportunity in Florida, and it doesn't apply only to that top 10%. It's if you want to get an advanced degree, and it doesn't always have to be baccalaureate. I think the current legislature is recognizing that a lot more with the CAPE program that they have, the career programs, that students coming out of high school need more. They need more than just that high school degree, but they may only need a certificate in a certain area. They might get Microsoft certified. They may go into a HVAC or plumbing, electrician. There are other kinds of ways to make a real good living. We need all kinds of skills to make life work. it takes a focus by the state to embrace all of those sectors and not just get focused on one little area and try to develop that one area.
All right. On that note, we need to take a pause along the network line. Let us remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks and of Tough TV. I'm Regan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day in studio is always a privilege to have Dr. Ed Moore, the president of the Independent College Universities of Florida, and we'll continue our conversation following these messages. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area also on Tough TV. I'm Regan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And our very special guest in studio today is Dr. Ed Moore. He is the president of the Independent Colleges and Universities of Florida, represents about 160,000 students around the state. It's always a pleasure to have you with us, sir. And you've got a brand new book for people who are interested in Florida history,
yes.
Political history, governmental history. This is, it's entitled The Speakers, Volume 2, and you cover 1994 to 2012, the House of Representatives of Florida. Tell us about your new book.
It was an idea of Speaker Will Weatherford, actually. Speaker Weatherford, early on, before he was Speaker, we had some long conversations. He's a real student of Florida history. He was aware of Volume 1, which was done by the Clerk of the House, Alan Morris, who was a noted historian.
Yeah.
And it was just this gap that had stopped in 1992 with Speaker Bolly Johnson, and Peter Rudy Wallace was the next one. And asked me if I'd be interested in doing it. I did it with love for Florida more than anything. I mean, there was no compensation in it, and just the joy of doing it. Got to interview a lot of wonderful people, and it tries just basically to capture the so if someone picks it up, they can capture what were the critical issues during each 2-year period, who were the players, what was going on in Florida, and it's really nice. Got to dig through the archives of all the old photos. And
for those who have been in Florida for more than 6 months, which if you're here 6 months, that kind of makes you semi-native, I think. But name drop for us a little bit. Who are some of the main players in your book?
Well, the very first one is, and when I interviewed him, he said, I wasn't the last Democrat speaker. I was just, there just hasn't been one since me. It was Peter Rudy Wallace, and then it covers the transition into Republican dominance. And I know you had Congressman Dan Webster, who was then the first Republican speaker, and it's just a real interesting transition in time from him to Speaker John Thrasher, and then to me a very interesting period in Florida history is when Tom Feeney became Speaker. You're talking about 2000 and the 2000 elections, and then and during that same speakership, 9/11 occurred with all the new security issues and reapportionment. It was like just every time you turned around, there was something really major going on.
Tom Feeney, that's a name you don't hear anymore. The blast from the past there.
Yeah, but he's Tom's still around. He is now the head of Associated Industries of Florida, and I see him occasionally at Tallahassee, more often around the state at different meetings. And then it runs from Speaker Feeney to Johnny Byrd, and then Alan Bentz and Marco Rubio, and just right down through time to current Speaker Will Weatherford. And interestingly, it was his idea and his project, and he insisted that since his speakership hadn't completed, that I just put a little bit in there, more just a little bio kind of history of him, and come back again when his 2 years as Speaker is up, and update. He said, no, let's see how I do before you write about it. You know? So
there's a man who watches, and we had last week we had former Speaker and now Congressman Dan Webster on.
Great guy. Yeah, great guy. He's one of the more humble people I've ever known who lived through a really tumultuous time. I mean, Florida had been under Democratic Party control forever.
Yeah.
And he came in and calmly took over the speakership. It's one of the joys of living in America is you can have these huge turnovers without bloodshed.
Yes. Although I think we might be getting towards bloodshed right now.
I'm kind of ignoring Washington these days, but in Tallahassee it stays kind of friendly, semi-friendly at worst.
For those whom we may have piqued a little interest in this, how can they find a copy of the book?
I believe through the office of the clerk of the Florida House of Representatives. It's only around $9. They're selling them at cost, the cost of printing them, just more for interest of the people getting a better handle on Florida history and capturing it soon after it happens rather than waiting 50 years and trying to look back.
Yeah, I'm delighted.
It's a handsome volume, and
I'm anxious to dig into it. And
I like the big seal of Florida right there on the front. That's fun.
Very well done.
Again, it is The Speakers, Volume 2, 1994 to 2012 by Dr. Ed Moore. And contact the clerk's office in Tallahassee.
The clerk of the House is Bob Ward, but his staff, I'm sure, will help you. And Bob and his staff were a great help to me in putting this together.
Obviously, this is a must-have for Florida historians, without a doubt. It's marvelous. Well, congratulations on that. And we trust that you'll get into Volume 3 before.
I hope I'm around to do that.
Well, you will be. You will be. We sense these things.
Yeah.
So we were talking earlier about Florida's education system and getting students ready for college, because college is really a whole another level of learning. Reagan and I both.
We hope so.
Reagan and I both have degrees. And when we went to school, the grammar was good. We really seen that slip a bit. And of course, now there's politics going on with education. We have Jeb Bush at odds with fellow Republican and Governor Charlie. No, I was saying Charlie Crist. Maybe that'll be our next governor. But anyway, Rick Scott. And Rick Scott is taking the I want to say, is it the ALEC line or the Tea Party line of now not wanting to do Common Core standards in Florida? And Jeb Bush is a fan of Common Core standards. I want to get your take on Common Core and what this bickering is all going to end up in. Do you think? What's your opinion?
My take on where Governor Scott is he's not against Common Core. He's not against the higher standards and thinks those standards needs to be in place. His immediate action a week or so ago was to pull Florida out of the PARC exam, which is the end of course, not the end of each individual course, but at the end of high school exam that a number of states have been involved in. And people on both sides have raised some issues about the PARC exam itself, that whether it's how the relevancy of it, the cost of it was part of the issue, that it was an extremely costly way. So his first action was to tell the State Board of Education, go back and look at that part and then kind of review and see where we are on the Common Core standards. I'm a strong proponent of those standards because what we're doing now isn't working. It's getting better, but if you just look, as I mentioned earlier, the ACT scores that came out from last year, and the ACT exam is generally taken by people that are going to college. They're taking that to assist them in their applications to college. 19% of the people that took the ACT exam, now this is nationwide, not just Florida, 19% of them were college ready on all four sections of the test. Only 19%.
That's very low.
Oh, yeah. And then the SAT scores came out last week. They did an analysis of their own scores from last year, and it basically said that 43% of those taking the ACT met their base standard score, which their base score out of a possible 2,400 is 1550. So 43% of them were able to get better than a 64% if you wanted to do that math on that exam. That's pitiful as well. We must do better, and raising the standards, having clear internationally based standards so that when we compare ourselves not just to Alabama or Georgia or Tennessee, but if we're comparing ourselves to Finland or Taiwan or wherever, we know that students are learning what needs to be learned to go out into the world of commerce. And we talk about global marketplaces and all that, but then everybody wants, we want local control and we want the local school board or the local school to make these determinations. No, they can make the determinations as to how that course is delivered, what the content might be of the course, or what textbooks might be used and those kind of things. but there needs to be a concise and understood level of this is the performance level that's expected, and by the end of third grade or fifth grade or eighth grade, this is what those students need to know. Right now, we're not there. And Common Core was one pathway to get us there.
All right. Once again, Ed, it's time for us to pause along the network line here. The clock is flying along here today. But we need to remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks in the Orlando area on Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest in studio, Dr. Ed Moore. He is the president of the Independent Colleges and Universities of Florida. And if you will stay put, our conversation continues following these messages. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and Tough TV in the Orlando area. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest is Dr. Ed Moore of the Independent Colleges and Universities of Florida. And Ed, it's always a pleasure to have you in the studio with us, and we appreciate it. We know you're a busy man. We appreciate all the time you've had to spend with us today. Before you go, I want to talk about your agenda. What the ICUF always has things that you're looking for to improve the situation. What's on your plate?
I would two primary areas are our focus this year. One is student aid. Student financial aid is always critical to creating access. We've talked earlier about how the state universities are bursting at the seams, and we are an avenue of trying to provide higher education for students across Florida. So there are student aid programs that are very helpful there. And secondly, I guess, would be on the economic development end. We've gotten increasingly involved in providing our resources. I've tried to, and Governor Scott coming in has done a great job of this with Grace Swope at Enterprise Florida and others, of recognizing higher education, public and private, as Florida-based assets. These are strong assets, so that when they're trying to attract business and industry across the country or across the world to come to Florida, that they utilize us as a resource base for them. So if you're talking to a company coming here and say, it's a company in the aerospace industry, to recognize that you have institutions here like Embry-Riddle or Florida Tech that are heavily involved in aerospace and just aeronautics in general. How do you blend those into the equation of attracting those businesses? That's going to be a real big focus, I think, over the coming years as the Florida economy continues to grow and diversify. We're not just tourism anymore and agriculture. We are a multifaceted economy, and we need the resources available from higher education to help stimulate that.
Well, and that's what we need to do. I totally agree with that, because you have to have that partnership between industries that want to come to Florida and the quality of education that's coming out of, obviously, you're heading up the place, the ICUF is private colleges, and we need to have more of that. We need to focus the attention of younger people on these technological and other related degrees, because otherwise, it works hand in hand. If you're only getting graduates coming out with pre-law degrees and English degrees, and I mean those are fine, but we're not seeing that translating into jobs as much.
No, it needs to be diverse. We did an analysis last year of the degrees granted by our 31 ICUF institutions, and actually found that 2/3 of those degrees were in business, education, allied health-related to health-related industries, and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. 2/3 of the degrees. So there, you can see there is a market response. And the state, I guess the third leg on that stool of things we're interested in is in online education. And the state is starting a new endeavor with the University of Florida. And what the state found, and we found when we did an analysis on that, was that ICUF institutions this fall, our 31 ICUF institutions, offer 323 fully online degree programs already there. A robust online degree market. There are schools, the University of Central Florida is a good example, that has used online learning to enhance the classroom, to create space, to allow students the option of taking a course every semester that's online in addition. Florida is ahead of the rest of the country. Board of Governors asked a company called Parthenon to come in and do an analysis on online education, and they came in from another state. I'm not quite sure why we'd ever ask somebody else to tell us what we're doing, but they did, and they were kind of surprised at that. They came in and saw how robust our online market already was. We're ahead of a lot of states. Florida's ahead of a lot of states in issues of articulation, which means students can transfer credits from one school to another, and it's acceptable credits. We've been doing that for a long time. I'm getting old, and I articulated from a community college, or then it was a junior college, to Florida State University back in 1970, 71 with an associate's degree and transferred in as a junior. There are other states in the United States that don't do that. They're not there. We need to start bragging on ourselves. So I guess the broader sense, what we need to do is start having more people. You said earlier about if you're here 6 months, you're a semi-Floridian. People bragging on the fact that they are from Florida.
Yeah.
And saying this is a great state and we need to work together.
Final note, people saying, well, ICUF, who belongs to it? I mean, you don't have to rattle off the whole list, but...
31 institutions. I guess the most southern one would be the University of Miami. The most northeast one would be Jacksonville University, and then everything in between: Stetson, Rollins, Florida Southern, Florida Tech, Flagler, Kaiser, Palm Beach Atlantic. I mean, there's a long list of them.
And by the time you get through all 31, you got about 160,000 students.
Yes, that's correct.
Wow. Well, it's good to know that you are out there representing all of these people, trying to look out for their interests. There's a lot more we could do.
People can go to our website.
Yeah. Oh, good, yeah.
They can go to icuf.org. You could hot link there to every institution. You can find out every online program. You can put in on the website if you're interested in a particular degree, who offers that degree. It's kind of interactive, and it'll take you right to the institution and hopefully find your niche and find what it is you want to study.
Well, it's a marvelous organization, and for the independent schools of this state, we are certainly glad that they've got the caliber of leadership such as yourself.
I appreciate that.
At the
Thank
top
you.
of this thing. ICUF.org. And also remember that Dr. Moore is the author of The Speakers, Volume 2, 1994 to 2012. You can contact the clerk's office of the Florida House in Tallahassee. Marvelous for those of you who are interested in Florida politics and Florida history. And Ed, again, our thanks for being here today, and we trust that a few months go by, we'll get you back in here and we'll get an update on how things are going.
I always love chatting with y'all.
Dr. Ed Moore. This is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al and I will be back with a closing thought following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks and of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry. So
Always
great to be here.
Always a pleasure to have Dr. Ed Moore with us.
Yes.
He stays on top of all the educational issues, and I think he does a fine job of representing Florida's independent colleges and universities. Well,
and you know what? We always say that kind of stuff when people give us free books.
Yeah. Well, yes.
No, he really is.
It's
He
marvelous
really is a
book,
great
too.
guy.
Yeah.
So let's look briefly at this shutdown. If this shutdown goes more than 3 weeks, it's going to affect our veterans. I think that Ed off-air made that a very good prediction that that's the wall that cannot be breached unless you really want to see some angry people.
Yeah.
Don't mess with the vets. So right now it's parks that are going to be closed. They're going to be non-essential workers from all facets of government. I mean, this happened this week. People just said,
consider this. I saw one. You know, there are about 2,100 employees left at the Kennedy Space Center, which is, since the shuttle program's gone. That's way down. But 2,100. Out of that 2,100, only 9 were supposed to report for work on Tuesday morning. Now, if I was on the International Space Station, I think I'd get a little nervous, you know.
Talk about the skeleton crew. That's the pinky bone of the skeleton crew.
Yeah, really. So, you know, and I have heard that you know, if you try to, Social Security checks will go out, but you can't call and talk to anybody because the office staff is all gone.
I have a prediction. I hate to make it, but my prediction is this is going to be the longest shutdown in history, and this will affect people.
Well, I believe you're right, and I think Dr. Moore was right too. That the 3 weeks is kind of a firewall. You start messing with the veterans and people's personal benefits, then you're really asking for trouble. So you could be right, and I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly how many days the last one went, but we'll find out. So let us say thank you for your time this day. We certainly appreciate it. I'm Reagan Smith,
and you know what, Reagan? When you make your bed, you got to lie in it. I'm Al Spry.
We'll see you next week on the Florida Roundtable.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.